Clinical evaluation pitfalls. Like any complicated process, it is relatively easy, unfortunately, to fall into traps when you're doing a clinical evaluation. So in this video, I'd like to take you through some of the most common ones, explain how you can hopefully avoid them in your submission, and then also point out some useful resources that you can use to ensure that your clinical evaluation meets all relevant requirements. So at Mantra Systems, we're engaged commonly to support manufacturers who've had an unsuccessful submission before. So we've a broad understanding of common ways in which a clinical evaluation might come off the rails. And on the board there, we've got some of the most common ones. It's not easy to find a top 5, but these ones do seem to come up time and again. So hopefully by taking you through these now, we can help ensure you don't replicate these mistakes. So the first common pitfall is lack of a proper search protocol. What people sometimes think is that having some research questions and search terms is enough for a search protocol. But that's not really the case. A search protocol should set out in detail, in advance, how you're going to find relevant sources, how you're going to appraise them, and how you're going to analyse them. And it also should include a justification for decisions that you've made. And that's what's often missing. There's no set way to do this, but the justifications have to be sound, meaningful, and well thought through. When it comes to how you're going to identify sources, you need to go into quite a lot of detail. So what databases are you going to use and why? How are you going to avoid duplication of results? What are your criteria for inclusion or exclusion? And how are you going to keep a record of everything? So a thorough search protocol set out in advance is a vital step. The next one that we see really time and time again is lack of safety and performance objectives. If you cast your mind back to the first video in this series, we talked about how these set out benchmark levels of safety and performance derived from devices that are similar to yours. And your device must be at least non-inferior to these values. But time and again, this just isn't done. So a state-of-the-art review is performed, but nothing meaningful is done with it. It's really important that the data you find from the state-of-the-art is analysed, brought together, pooled and weighted to produce meaningful, quantitative safety and performance objectives. The next common pitfall that we see is choosing the wrong route to conformity. This is very easy to fall into for a number of reasons. A lot of legacy devices may have used the equivalence route to conformity, where you're relying on data from another product. But claiming equivalence under the EU MDR is actually a lot more difficult than it used to be. And another area where this pitfall manifests is for devices that have successfully gone to market in the US through a 510K, where substantial equivalence is a similar concept but relies only on technical characteristics, whereas here in the EU, or for submissions in the EU, you need to also show similarity in biological and clinical characteristics as well. So it's much more difficult. Another common mistake is using the route in Article 6110, which is for when reliance on clinical data would be inappropriate, but it's often used when there just isn't any clinical data, and that's not what that route to conformity is intended for. So be careful when you're choosing your route to conformity. Number 4, we touched on this one previously, improper use of equivalence. There are specific requirements set out for equivalence. MDCG guideline 2020-5 is really useful in outlining those. The bottom line is, if you're thinking of using equivalence, take good advice, because relying on that route where it's not appropriate could derail your submission. And then the final one is a lack of a quantitative benefit risk assessment. You know, probably under the old MDD, it was acceptable to compare benefits and risks for a medical device qualitatively, to set out what the benefits are, set out what the risks are, and form an argument that the benefits outweigh the risks. Under MDR, that's no longer enough. You need to generate a ratio, a numerical ratio, comparing benefits to risks. That's beyond the scope of this short video. It will be covered in a later part of this series, but it stands in a similar way to equivalence, really. If you're not sure how to do that, make sure you take advice. So if there are pitfalls, it would be helpful to have some guidance around. And on this graphic, we've got some important sources of guidance that you can refer to. So the first one is the MDR itself. Don't be shy about going straight to the source. Some of it's complicated legalese, but actually usually the annexes are quite easy to work with. So definitely refer to the MDR directly. MedDev Guideline 2.7/1 revision 4, bit of a mouthful. This was the old go-to guidance for clinical evaluation under MDD. It is a little bit out of date now, but there are still some parts of it that can be considered, including structuring a search protocol. The MDCG guidelines are much more up to date. They're not actually law, but they're often taken almost as if they were. We mentioned 2020-5 before for equivalence. 2020-6 is specific information in relation to submissions for legacy devices. And 2020-13 is almost a cut down mark scheme that notified bodies will look at when evaluating your clinical evaluation. Very useful to find. And then finally, the Mantra Systems website is full of useful and free information that's available for you to download. So feel free to visit the website, take what you need and make sure you've got all the right guidance to help you pursue maximum success in your clinical evaluation submissions.